Hi, this is Jason Baker, and welcome to our first hands-on video in the class. The purpose of these hands-on videos is to give you an opportunity to watch me exercise a number of the different tools and technologies that we'll learn about in this course. And I also want you to be able to follow along with me from your home so that you could also try to log in and replicate many of the steps I'm following during these hands-on segments. This will give you an opportunity to gain a little bit of familiarity with the various AWS services that we use in the class. You can see that I've already logged into the AWS Web Console, and there are a number of different things that I want to point out before we start looking at our first service, which is the Identity and Access Management Service, otherwise known as IAM. I'm logged into the console, and at the very top you can see that I'm logged in with my username. And I'm logged into a particular region, which is the North Virginia region, also known as US East 1. We'll learn in a couple weeks that AWS services are partitioned into different geographic regions all over the world. Most of the time we'll be working in US East 1 in this class, although there are times where we'll switch and we'll maybe use US East 2 or US West 2 during the class. It's always important to understand which region you're operating in because, for example, you could launch something like an EC2 instance in the US East 1 region, North Virginia region. And then if you switched to a different region in this web console, let's say you switched to US West 2, for example, then the EC2 instance that you launched in US East 1 would no longer be visible because you've switched to a different geographic region. This can sometimes be confusing for students as they're kind of creating resources in different regions, and they suddenly find that a resource that they created has disappeared from the web console. It hasn't disappeared from AWS. It's just likely that you've switched to a different region. So you always have to be aware of what region you are operating in. Some services are not associated with a particular region. There's a few services which are truly global services, and identity and access management just happens to be one of them. So let's take a look at that service first in this hands-on segment. To get to the Identity and Access Management Service, I'm going to select the Services drop-down menu. And here you can see all the different services that are available in AWS. There are literally hundreds of services available now. I remember when I first started working with AWS over a decade ago, all of the services could easily fit on just one page without scrolling. And the font sizes were a little bigger as well. And now you can see there's so many different services that are available. We want to select the Identity and Access Management Service, which is under the Security, Identity, and Compliance section. I'll go ahead and select IAM. And this pulls up the Identity and Access Management Dashboard. Now, what is Identity and Access Management? Well, this is the service which basically controls access to AWS, to your AWS account, and all of the different services that might be running in that account. So the IAM service is responsible for security and assigning access privileges. It's an incredibly important service. It's also a global service. So if I look in the upper right-hand corner, you notice that there's no region, it just says global in that drop-down menu. So IAM configurations will apply to services across all the different regions within your account. I've logged into this dashboard, and one of the first things that you can see is that it provides me with a set of security recommendations, and your goal is to have all of these checked, which means that you have enabled the desired configuration within your account. For example, AWS recommends that you enable multi-factor authentication on your account. You can see I have these checked because I have MFA enabled. Multi-factor authentication means that you not only log into your account with a username and password, but you also use some other mechanism to verify your identity. And that could be something like using the Google Authenticator app running on your smartphone, which emits a randomly generated PIN code every 60 seconds. And so you would provide that PIN code. It might mean that you get a text message every time you log in, and that text message would include like a 6-digit PIN code that you would type in as well. So it's an additional layer of security, which is really optimal to have in place on your account. The dashboard also shows me like how many different IAM resources I have set up, how many different user groups, users, roles, policies, etc. And I'll talk about those in a minute here. One thing to keep in mind when looking at this dashboard, not only in this hands-on segment, but throughout the course, is that the AWS Web Console is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. In fact, it changes like every 6 months or so. As AWS adds new features and capabilities, and sometimes they'll completely redo their web consoles for particular services, and which always makes these kinds of tutorial videos challenging, because it's possible that when students log in and look at the web console, it might look slightly different from the time when this video was recorded, which was the fall of 2021. Additionally, there have been situations where, AWS, when they roll out changes to their dashboard, they don't necessarily roll out that change to all of their customers at the same time. So it's possible that you could have two different students who are looking at slightly different versions of the AWS dashboard. And sometimes that can also be a little bit confusing. I had one semester where I taught, and one of these service dashboards changed right in the middle of the semester, and it changed the very week of the assignment that students had to perform for that particular service. And so that really became challenging, because it's like all my documentation and videos suddenly didn't reflect reality anymore. So just keep that in mind, that these dashboards, that there could be slight changes over the coming months and coming years when you may be watching this video. Let's look at each of the different access management capabilities that are available to us in the IAM dashboard. And the access management menu on the left-hand side, if I click on user groups, I can see different groups that have been set up within IAM. I can create users in IAM. Users, you would think of them as being like individual people, maybe in your company, that would be accessing your AWS account. And groups allows you to create this grouping mechanism. So you can group multiple people together in the same group and then associate a set of access permissions with that group, so that when those users log into AWS, they're associated with that particular group, and all the users then have the same sort of access privileges. Let's go ahead and create a user group here. I'm going to click on the Create Group button and give the user group a name. let's call it the developers group for our application development team. We could add users to this group if we wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and add my personal account. We'll create a user account as well and add them to this group here in a few minutes. And we can attach permission policies to this group as well. And there are like literally hundreds of different permission policies which are built into AWS that are managed by AWS. AWS also allows us to create our own custom policies, which is something that's very, very common. And we'll do that later on in the course. And these custom policies allow us to tailor the security to a specific requirement, to a specific group or even to a specific user. So in this case, I'm going to just type in EC2 and filter on EC2 policies, and I'm going to give the developers, let's say I'm going to give them EC2 read-only access to the account. So the developers can log into the web console and they can look at the configuration of EC2 instances, but they don't have the ability to create new instances or start and stop existing instances. So that looks good that we've attached that policy. I'm going to create the group. And now it says that the developers user group has been created. And you can see that the group is now listed in the groups listing. Okay, let's look at users next. We'll click on the users link on the left-hand nav. And here it shows me a list of the users that have been created for this AWS account. I'm going to go ahead and create a new user. And I'm going to create a new user for a fictitious person. We'll just say J. Smith. We're going to create a user account for a member of our organization, J. Smith, and we select an AWS access type. And there are two different options we can enable here. We can enable account with an access key for programmatic access or with a password for AWS Management Console access. If I'm creating a user account for a team member in my organization, it's likely that they're going to want to access the AWS Management Console, the web console, just like I'm accessing now. And so I'll click on the password AWS Management Console access checkbox. And here it will either auto-generate a password or I can define a custom password. So I'm just going to say auto-generated password for now. And then when that user logs in the first time to the web console, they'll have to reset that password. Well, what is this programmatic access option? That allows a user to create an access key and a secret access key, a set of API credentials that they can use to programmatically access the AWS API. In this case, the user isn't accessing AWS and managing resources via the web console. They're actually managing resources via an application programming interface. They're managing resources programmatically using an API key and a corresponding secret key. We will actually use this a bit later in the course, but this is an incredibly important capability because pretty much everything that we're doing here in this web console could also be done programmatically, meaning that we could make modifications to our AWS infrastructure and resources using something like a shell script running on a Linux system or Windows system. We could create a Python script or Java application that could manage and make changes to resources without having to use this web interface. So programmatic access is really important. And we'll set up programmatic access for this particular user account. I click on Next Permissions, and here I have the opportunity to add this user to a group. And let's add them to that developers group that we created a short time ago. We'll click on Next Tags. And we have the opportunity to set up a one or more tags for this user account. What you'll find is that most every resource in AWS can have tags associated with it. And tags just represent key values that are used as metadata to provide some additional information, some additional context about a particular resource. So for example, we could create a key called team and a value called developers. Let's say they were on the developers team in our organization. So we could just create this key value. Again, this is metadata. This is providing us with some additional context for this particular resource. I'll click the Next Review button, and this gives me an overview of what AWS is going to create, this user account and the permissions that are going to be associated with it. I'll click the Create User button. And when I do that, it tells me that it's successfully created the users, and I can download a CSV file. If I download that CSV file, it will show the auto-generated password that's associated with that user account, and I could give that password then to that person, and they could use it to access the web console. It also is generating that access key and the secret access key. So you can see here is the access key ID. It's this long string of alphanumeric characters, and then the secret access key. So if I show that, there's the secret associated with the account. So you could almost think of the access key ID as being sort of like the username, and the secret access key as being like a password. These, of course, are secrets. They're very confidential, and you would never, ever want to publish them anywhere publicly, because if bad actors found these credentials, then they could log into your AWS account from anywhere in the world, and they would have whatever permissions are associated with this particular user. I can also show the password here. So here's the password that was set up, allowing the user to access the web console. I'm going to go ahead and close that. We won't need to use this anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this user account. So if I just select the user account, I can say delete. And if I want to confirm deletion, then I need to type in the account name. And it went and deleted the account for me. Of course, I wouldn't want to keep that account around, because I'm recording a video and publishing it to YouTube, and anybody watching this could have just grabbed those credentials and potentially used them to access my account and do something malicious. So I definitely want to get rid of those credentials. we'll go ahead and go back to the dashboard. One other thing I wanted to point out real quick is on the right-hand side, I have set up something called an account alias, which I can use to create a custom sign-in URL. When you create your account, and if you look at your dashboard, you'll notice that AWS kind of creates this random sort of looking sign-in URL. You can actually modify that by setting up an account alias, and that just produces a more friendly looking URL, a web link that you can hand out to staff members in your organization. Let's look at roles next. I look at the roles section, and what roles allow you to do is roles are basically associated with multiple access policies, and we can apply roles to users, we can apply roles to other resources within AWS like EC2 accounts. And so roles are a mechanism that we use to grant certain access privileges to people and also things like EC2 instances. And just like policies, I'll note that there are a number of roles that are built into AWS. And of course, we can also create our own custom role. One of the first things I actually had you do in this class during the EC2 launch video was to create a custom role. And that custom role that you created, that SSM access role, we could apply that role to EC2 instances, meaning that what we're specifying is what sort of access privileges should an EC2 instance have while it's running. And in this case, an EC2 access that has the SSM access role applied to it will have the access privileges granted by this particular policy, the Amazon SSM Managed Instance Core policy. I can actually look at that policy, and I'm looking at it in what's called JSON format. And this is a document format that describes the specific access permissions allowed by this policy, and therefore allowed by the role that the policy is attached to. For example, you can see that this particular policy is allowing access for all of these different actions, these different action permissions within AWS. And these access permissions are basically allowed us to access that EC2 instance using Session Manager. Now, IAM roles and policies can be more of an advanced topic, and so we do look at them a little bit in this course, but we don't really dive that deep, just because there is really a lot to understand when it comes to setting up IAM roles and policies. And most of the time, I kind of tell you explicitly what needs to be set up with respect to roles and policies. But creating the proper role and policy is absolutely critical when it comes to building a highly secure cloud environment. And oftentimes when you hear about companies that have been hacked and they're running in the cloud, it's because they made some sort of mistake when setting up these access privileges. They didn't scope the access privileges narrowly enough. They're too broadly scoped, and somebody was able to access their data and do some malicious things. And so it is important to understand the purpose of roles and policies and how to configure them. And I'll give you guidance throughout the course in exactly how to do that. But these topics are also more of an advanced topic, and there are some fantastic resources out there if you want to dive in deeper and gain more knowledge about IAM roles and policies. If I click on policies, then this allows me to create the various policies that I would attach to roles. If I click on the create policy button, for example, then I can go through sort of a wizard-like menu where I can choose a particular service that I want to create a policy for. So let's say I want to create a policy for something like EC2. So I could select EC2, and then it's asking me what sort of actions I want to enable. And I'm going to say, well, I'm going to enable read-only access permissions in AWS. And it's asking me to specify resources. I'm going to specify all resources in this case. Best practice is to narrowly define that. And they actually tell you that as a best practice, define permissions for only specific resources and specific accounts. And so generally we want to sort of avoid creating a policy which applies to all resources in our account. We'd like to narrowly scope that. But for this example, I think it's fine. I click on Next Tags. Here I can add some metadata tags. I won't do that now. I'll click on Next Review. I can give this this policy a name. So I can just say my EC2 read only policy. I could give it a description. This provides read only access to EC2 resources. And then I go ahead and create the policy. It says my EC2 read-only policy has been created. And if I do a search for that, then here's my policy that I just created. And it shows all of the different actions which have been enabled, which is many of the different EC2 actions that are associated with only being able to read the configuration for EC2 resources. I could select this. I'm not going to actually use this policy, so I'm going to go ahead and select it and click on delete. And I can then, it's asking me to type in the policy name. I just copied and pasted it. I'll go ahead and delete it. And now that policy's been deleted because I don't really need to use it. I'm just using it for a tutorial purpose. If I go back to the access management menu on the left, I'm going to click on the account settings menu option. And the account settings menu option allows you to modify a few different things. You can modify the password policy for the account. So this is the password policy for the web console access. You can specify how many, what the minimum password length is. You can specify what sort of complexity is required to access the AWS account. And so you could modify these settings to conform with whatever your organizational requirements are. If I scroll down here, you see that we can activate or deactivate endpoints. And this is a way we can restrict access to particular regions in AWS. If I wanted to prevent staff members from accessing particular regions of the world, let's say I didn't want staff to be able to build anything in South America, in Brazil, then I could click on the deactivate link here and essentially deactivate access to that particular region. So it's one way to sort of prevent staff from accessing anything other than the specific regions that you have enabled for your account. Well, that's sort of a basic overview of identity and access management. I think it shows you pretty much everything you need to know for our particular class. Of course, there are a bunch of other features that are available within IAM, for example, like the access reports and access analyzer features and so on. These are things that corporate security teams might use. Those aren't necessary for our course, and so the things I've showed you are pretty much the key capabilities that we'll leverage during the semester. I hope this hands-on segment was helpful for you, and get ready for the next one. Thank you.